So we're speaking with Andy West today. Andy, would you like to tell us about the work that you do?
Great, yes, thank you. So I work for an organisation called the Philosophy Foundation, and our raison d'etre is to take philosophy out into the community, into places where historically it hasn't been before. For a large part of my career I taught philosophy in primary schools to children, mainly children between age 7 to 11. And in the last 2 or 3 years I've been teaching in prisons, which has been incredibly thrilling way to look at the human condition. It's given me another level, I think, to really think about these questions. And I'm currently writing a book for Picador about my experiences teaching philosophy in prison, which will be out in a couple of years.
Was that a difficult switch going from teaching children to teaching people in prison?
I think when you teach children for a long time, you're at the risk of becoming a very patronising person. At least I was in some ways, and maybe I was guilty of that when I first went into prison, because I sort of went in with this quite political truth, I suppose, that most prisoners will be illiterate, most prisoners wouldn't have finished school, and of course there are a lot of people in prison who are in that situation. But what happened was I dumbed the material down so much that within 20 minutes I was running out of material, and the classes are 3 hours long, and I had students telling me that I hadn't really explained Locke faithfully to how John Locke would explain it, or people were mentioning Rousseau. People had criminology degrees.
They were much more intellectual and academic than you had expected.
Yeah, especially say in a maximum security prison where people are in for long periods of time, and you know, by and large I think it's sort of terrible to lock people up for long periods of time, but one advantage it did have for some people was access to education. In a sustained way could sometimes happen if things were on their side in terms of financial support, support within the prison and stuff like that.
They had access to education in prison?
I mean, the access to education in a lot of prisons in the UK is very rudimentary. It's English and maths, especially in a maximum security prison. You know, it's very getting a job orientated. So to do something like philosophy with people who have already done all those things, perhaps already done those things 2 or 3 times, you know, my students were always really eager to be in the class, and if there was a hold-up and the class started 15 minutes late because of security issue or something, I'd be really enjoying this, because I got another 15 minutes of not teaching, just sitting in my chair drinking my tea, which I thought was wonderful. But they would come in really frustrated at having lost 15 minutes of learning time.
That's
and
really
it was
interesting and wonderful.
It was, yeah. One of those reminders of what it's like to live within the walls compared to just visiting the prison. It was a really palpable frustration that took some time to dissolve within the lessons.
So they were really looking forward to your lessons. What is an example of a lesson plan you give?
Well, I really like using the Greeks a lot. Obviously it's where a lot of Western philosophy started. There's also something about the kind of pre-Socratic era in Greece, which I think is incredibly philosophically fertile. So the Odyssey a lot. Freedom is obviously a really pertinent topic in prison. One example of using the Odyssey to talk about freedom was the story of Odysseus travelling past the sirens, and he ties himself to the mast, and when he hears the sirens' music he wants to break free, but he's also got this other desire, which is that he doesn't want to break free. That's why he's tied himself to the mast. So from a freedom point of view, that's very interesting. Also, the other members of the crew have wax in their ears, and I sometimes like to ask the students, well, who do you think's more free, the crew members or Odysseus tied up? And it's really interesting. You get some responses which are really, I don't think you would get if you weren't in a prison setting.
I can imagine.
An interesting debate recently about, someone said the people with the wax in their ears are more free than Odysseus because they're free from choice. And I think there's something incredibly pertinent about someone incarcerated who is told when they get up, when they shower, when they eat, when they sleep, when they go and walk around the association yard, whose whole movements are controlled, to talk about being free in terms of free from choice. And that became very important conversation for the men to have about whether being free from choice is a real freedom or not, or whether it's just the sort of the best of a bad situation.
And so the focus of that particular conversation turned into freedom of choice rather than, let's say, for the people who are not in prison, usually that conversation goes to going out and finding your dream or chasing something out there, or an adventure, or...
Yeah, freedom, you know, when we normally talk about freedom, we're talking about it with an open horizon. But what if you're living behind a wall? What's freedom then? Maybe not having a choice could come to resemble a kind of freedom. But what I love about doing philosophy with people who perhaps aren't in the academy or aren't academics, is just the opportunity for surprise that I have in what I'm hearing. And that was definitely one of those moments where I felt really surprised.
What other topics do you usually pursue, or kind of questions you ask the prisoners?
So
Beckett, for instance.
Beckett, that's a slight work in progress, so I don't have that much to talk about in relation to Beckett. But another example, this doesn't come from Greece or the classics, but this could be still relevant. Another example is trying to find figures through history whose lives contained a philosophical moment, and at the same time whose lives might speak with great relevance to someone who's experiencing incarceration. So I really love the painter Caravaggio. Extremely interesting life, a very extreme character, born in Milan during the Black Death. By the time he's 6 years old, every single male member of his close family is dead. He goes on to become an incredibly talented painter, self-taught, doesn't really see the point in having a teacher because he's better than all of them anyway. He's also really into gambling, booze, women, prostitutes, fighting, and all of that kind of... There's part of his sensitivity came out in his art, and part of his sensitivity seemed to come out in a kind of recklessness, and he's known for killing 2 people in Milan. He then moves to Rome. He's got his art protected him in so many ways, and the people he was in with, because he was commissioned by so many friends in high places.
Were the prisoners somehow sympathetic to this character?
Well, there's a moment in Caravaggio's life where he kills someone in Rome, someone from the Tomasoni family, who's quite influential, and he's expecting that what will normally happens, that witnesses suddenly get amnesia, that people drop the charges, that the Pope or someone else in a high place will protect him. But actually he's a wanted man at this point. People are sick of him, and he has to go into exile, and there's a bounty on his head. And he does this incredible thing where he paints himself twice within a picture. He paints the head of Goliath as held by David, and he is both David and Goliath in that picture. This time David hasn't stoned Goliath, he's beheaded him with a sword, much like Caravaggio had stabbed someone back in Rome, and he sends it from Naples, where he paints it, to Rome, to the Pope's nephew, the Minister of Justice, in order to get a pardon. And I think, you know, we're talking about lots of interesting questions at the moment in the art world, I think, where perhaps a lot of the 20th century sort of characterized the artist as an extremist, as decadent, as kind of, you know, there's something okay about artists being badly behaved, or maybe something necessary about artists being badly behaved. And I think now we're in a time where we're talking about whether it's morally right to listen to Billie Jean by Michael Jackson anymore, and can you watch Harvey Weinstein films, can you watch Woody Allen films? There's this big debate between art and morality, and I think that Caravaggio painting really encompasses it. And so I was so keen to know what the prisoners would make of this, and they really, you know, scrutinized the painting as to whether this was a painting of genuine remorse, or whether it was contrived, whether it was a painting of humility or whether it was arrogant.
So you presented the painting without any history behind it?
Oh no, I told them the function that the painting had, and a lot of them said, no, this guy should absolutely not get a pardon.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, I think another one of the ways I was surprised working in prison is you sort of expect to go in and everyone tell you that actually they're innocent, and maybe for figures like Caravaggio to be deeply heroic. But I think what people saw in Caravaggio was some people were able to recognize the self-destruction that had ruined their own lives in some way. And actually people in prison having a very firm sense of justice, in a sense that maybe the prison system doesn't treat them properly, or think, you know, that there's lots of problems there, but that actually they do deserve to be punished. I meet that a lot in people in prison. The thing is, these people don't have a voice. I know in my country it's illegal for people in prison to vote. I know in Florida, until very recently, if you had ever committed a felony, you could never vote. So there's a sense in which you don't have a voice politically. There's also, you can't publish anything from prison, or there are, you know, very, very strict sanctions about that. So the experience of what it's like to be a prisoner, unless you take a very specialist interest in that, you're not likely to find out, because the way things are set up legally, we don't really get to know what that experience is like. So bringing in these figures like Odysseus and the Sirens and Caravaggio, I really feel like I'm getting to understand just a fraction of a dimension of this experience.
Are those going to be in your book?
Yes, they will, and you can buy it in all good bookshops in February 2022. It's a long way off, but yeah.
How far along are you in your book?
I've got 40,000 words, but they're all humiliatingly awful. And I look at it and I think, oh God, what have you done? So I'm going to spend the next year and a half trying to mend my book, and then hopefully it'll be ready.
Well, thank you for showing me some of your book. I don't think it's awful.
Okay, good.
I think it's coming along.
But it is humiliating. No.
What made you decide to start writing about your work?
I never ever wanted to write about my work. I've always had aspirations to be a writer, and I sent a short story to an editor on a platform, and this short story has been rejected. It's a 1,300 word short story. I thought it was very good, but it's been rejected about 47 times, and this was the 48th time it got rejected. It was a very tender rejection, I have to say. She wrote, the editor, about 400 or 500 words just saying, you know, I really love the images, but this doesn't quite work, and you know, there's lots of good tension in your dialogue, but you know, there's a problem. And then at the end of her email, she said, but I saw in your bio that you teach philosophy in prison, so do you want to write about that? And I sort of thought, okay, this is the silver lining, and God, I best think of something to write. And I didn't write anything for weeks. I was totally uninterested. But
Uninterested or scared?
I thought it would just be incredibly boring writing about what happens inside a classroom. And then I wrote it, and as I was writing it, I really knew I wanted to include my father in the story. My father, who I haven't seen for 20 years. The last time I saw him, he wrote me a letter to say he was looking at doing some time in prison, that was likely to happen. And I know he'd been in prison previously in his life. So for me, there's while I'm working in prison, there is the shadow of my father in those moments. And also my brother spent a lot of time in prison, and so has my uncle. They've been in and out throughout their life. So I suppose the strong autobiographical current was there in the writing. And I sat down and wrote it, and she gave me 1,500 words to write it, the editor. And then I wrote 5,500 words and sent it to her, and she sent it back to me immediately saying, I can't publish 5,500 words, you know, can you edit this please? And I said, well, I'm afraid I can't. Would you be able to just take what you need? And she indulged me and did in fact publish the full thing. She cut out about 300 words, but that was it. And now I'm writing a book about it. So yeah, it was. I thought it would be the least interesting thing to write about. But actually, when I was writing it, I felt very kind of close to the source of something powerful, and I just realised there's so much material here. It's about philosophy, it's about prison, it's about what it means to love someone who lives on the other side of a prison wall and not have access to them, and then they come out and maybe you still don't have access to them in some way. So I really felt like there was just so much going on that I'm just so thrilled to have this opportunity to turn it into something bigger, and I hope I don't let my publishers down for showing faith in me.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us about it today. This was really different, inspiring, I think, and just fascinating. So thank you very much.
Great. If you want to know more about the siren story, I should say I didn't write that material. My colleague, my wonderful colleague, Peter Worley at the Philosophy Foundation did. So I should credit him in the piece if there's any way to do that. But yeah, do you want to talk any more? Or?
No, that's it.
Okay, great.